Join me today as I speculate, probably ramble, on whether or not the Disney Plus Star Wars shows conceptually have been a mistake. This is the Geek Cabal channel. My name is Bobby, and today we're going to be talking about the Star Wars shows on Disney Plus, and have they potentially done more harm than good? Have they been a good idea? That kind of stuff. So we're 2-3 weeks past the cancellation of the Acolyte Season 2. Due to the incredibly low viewership of the Acolyte Season 1. I've done numerous videos about the Acolyte as I reviewed all the episodes as they came out, because I did watch them. I'm kind of surprised it was canceled, because it does seem to be like the culmination of everything they've been building towards. But I guess you just can't beat math. But we're not here to relitigate that disaster. I mean, we're going to talk about it, but you know, my other videos have talked about mainly the post-mortem video is where I talk about where everything went wrong, and I tried to be generous and talked about things that did or were close to going right, or where they could have taken things before I get into where it all went wrong. So try to go for, try to be fair. So thus far what we're talking about, and I'm primarily talking about the live action. The animated shows have a much lower budget, and there's different expectations there. Plus, to be honest, I haven't watched all of them, because I'm not the uber Star Wars fan. I'm the high moderate Star Wars fan. I've just been one for a very long time. So what I'm talking about here, what we're going to focus on are shows like The Mandalorian, and its 3 seasons, Ahsoka, Obi-Wan, The Acolyte, and the Book of Boba Fett. I don't think I'm missing anything there. With that in mind, let's talk about what seems to have worked. The first 2 seasons of The Mandalorian seem to get moderate praise to high praise. And I didn't think the 3rd season was terrible. The 3rd season was just not as good as season 1 and 2. And it's hard for me to put my finger on exactly where things went wrong there. But overall, conceptually, what you have is a show that is episodic. A lot of the episodes you can just kind of jump in, at least for the first season and a half. There is an overarching narrative to each season, but the seasons themselves they're not quite what I would say you could do in syndication. This is kind of I'd compare it kind of to the X-Files. Most of the episodes of the X-Files you could probably just watch in syndication in any given order. There's going to be a few things where it's this is in a later season, so there's different partners on here, and we had this revelation back in this season that's kind of barely important to this episode, but you do need to know it. But then you also have these are the important episodes, and they need to be watched in order. So it's kind of like that. Or I hate to compare it to Star Trek The Next Generation, because there's only a handful of episodes that ever reference previous episodes. And it's a little more involved than that, but not quite so much as Deep Space Nine, where a lot of the episodes, you need to watch them in order. There's episodic episodes, where just things happen. But the overarching plot, you need to know where you are in the series. So I guess actually it's a lot like that. And for the most part, it worked. But then we have Obi-Wan Kenobi. Now, Obi-Wan is just a limited thing. It should have probably just been a movie, because there's almost not quite enough plot to keep it rolling, yet they tried to. There are definitely parts that could be cut. You could just make it into a movie. And a lot of people disagree with having Obi-Wan focus his efforts on Leia instead of Luke, because Luke is the one he's supposed to be protecting, and we're never really given any indication in the original trilogy that Leia actually knows Obi-Wan. Yet after this, she very clearly does. So, that's kind of a lore potential issue there. And then we have Ahsoka, where it was building to something, but we never got the payoff to the something, because we knew Thrawn was going to be in it from the trailers and things like that, and him making it back. And then on a cliffhanger, we're going to get a season 2 from what I hear. But again, we could probably take what's going to happen in season 2, and assuming that's it, and we probably could have broken that down into like a couple of movies, or maybe a trilogy of movies. And so that's kind of what we keep coming back to. Now, Andor, which I've realized I forgot to mention in my little spiel at the beginning, Andor's a little different. Andor's longer. Andor's 12 episodes compared to these others, which mostly had 8, I think. So you're able to really go into things in Andor. And Andor is the kind of thing that, like, I don't think you could have compressed that down to a movie. Plus, we're going to get another season. So Andor, I think, is closer to what you should be shooting for. And then there's The Acolyte, which, again, you probably could have just compressed down to a movie. It still would have been a bad movie, but you should have done that. So, overall, though, what does this mean? And I think the big takeaway is that unless you're going to make longer seasons and make them more like a regular network television show, then what are you doing? 8 episodes, 8 half-hour-long episodes is 4 hours. Would it really be that hard to cut that down to 2.5, 2 3/4, maybe 3, and just make it a movie? And if so, why aren't you doing that? Because you're stretching, you're taking a movie narrative and stretching it out unnaturally. I think that's what's happening. I think Obi-Wan, I think The Acolyte, maybe even Ahsoka, possibly all started life as movie pitches. And then they were like, hey, let's just pad this out and put it on Disney Plus. Kind of the opposite of, like, say, The Eternals, which they condensed too much. And it should have been like, there are 9 main characters. Maybe we should make this like a 12-episode show on Disney Plus instead of a 3-hour movie that feels like you're sitting there for all of eternity watching it. So that's I think that's a major problem that they have. Because, when people think of a show, they don't just think of, oh, it's just a longer movie broken up with unnatural pauses. And so that's why I just don't think the shows are working. That's why I think Andor does work, because it's longer. It's 12 episodes. And maybe you should go longer still. And maybe you should make the episodes an hour long. So now I know that's going to have some insane budget probably. But, again, look at what's been working. Andor and The Mandalorian are primarily set in the middle of nowhere. Your sets could literally just be, hey, let's go film in the desert or the ice or, whatever. So you need to build that into what you're doing. You need to take into account, hey, we're going to get like 1 or 2 like really fantastic set pieces and a bunch of CGI and stuff, But for the most part, we're in like the Badlands or something where we don't need any of that. The most you're going to have is like a CGI, hover bike or something, and use practical effects everywhere you can, or set it on one planet or in one facility or something, and so you can reuse the sets over and over again. Like, look at Alien or Aliens. You know, there's not that many sets for those movies. It's just tight, confined spaces, which set designers can build those out of like nothing. Uh, you know, like like Tony Stark built the Iron Man armor in a cave with a box of scraps. Yeah, they can build those in a cave with a box of scraps too. So do that. Be more budget conscious. Do like the Mandalorian, and don't have the Jedi through most of the show, so you don't have to worry about lightsaber effects and force powers and things like that. Uh, don't go for like a bunch of space combat, and leave that to the movies. Or have like your one big set piece that's out in space. But you can do these things, although the one potential problem you run into with doing that is you're making Star Wars small. And I just don't know if Star Wars long term works as small. And I think that might be part of the problem with these shows, why it's been like a steady decline in viewership. Because look at any of the Star Wars movies, even the crappy Disney ones. There's a lot going on. There are big galactic things happening. In the first movie, yeah, sure, a chunk of it's on Tatooine, where it's this desert, and a second sun superimposed in the image. That's easy enough. But then you're out in space dodging TIE fighters, and you got the Death Star, and you got the big trench run, and you're on board the Death Star, fighting stormtroopers, and Vader and Obi-Wan going at it. Like a lot of things happen in that movie. The Empire Strikes Back. Yeah, you're on an ice planet, and then the Empire shows up and kicks your teeth in. Then Luke's off on Dagobah. Now things kind of slow down, not much is happening, but things of great importance for the franchise are happening there. Meanwhile, the others are hiding in an asteroid, which turns out to be like a living creature. Then they got to run to the Cloud City, and then there's a big fight there. Then Luke and Vader fight. Things are happening. Even though like things kind of look kind of small scale, but you can look small scale but be big scale. Like the fight between Luke and Vader, that's like Fate of the Galaxy kind of stuff right there, even though it's just two guys lightsaber fighting. But the context of that fight is what makes it bigger. And so that's one thing you can do with the shows. You can dial back the pizzazz, but still have that meaning. It's like if you folks have never seen the Red Letter Media critique of the prequel trilogy, which you should. It's very entertaining, very informative. Each one is longer than the movie that they're critiquing, but their comments on some of the lightsaber fights are really valid in that they lack a context to give them weight. We know in the original trilogy that Vader and Luke fighting, that's, Fate of the Galaxy stuff. If Luke loses, he's going to be captured and taken to the Emperor and probably turned to the dark side, and that's the ball game. And then the Return of the Jedi, the fight between Luke and Vader is for the fate of the galaxy, the fate of the light versus dark, good versus evil. Like, there's a lot of emotion in that fight. The music backs it up. You see Luke, Vader pushes him, and Luke momentarily gives in and wins, but then sees the cost, or he sees Vader's hand, looks at his own hand, and realizes that he's becoming just like him. He's like, you know what? I'm done. If I die, I die. I'm not turning into that. Do what you got to do, Palpatine. And so, and it's, you don't need a budget for that. That's all. That's dialogue. That's good writing. That's foreshadowing. that's good acting, you know? And so these kind of things have more weight than anything at all in the Acolyte. Like, it didn't matter who won any fight in the Acolyte. Like, sorry. It just didn't. Now, I will say the fight between, is it Balin Skull and Ahsoka, that seemed to have some weight to it, because there was some dialogue about Anakin, her bit seeing Anakin there in I think the World Between Worlds. There was a bit of weight to that. Could have been better, but it wasn't bad. But then, now the fight between Obi-Wan and Vader, that had emotional weight to it. Now, the rest of the show was sketchy, but I think that part was really well done. Especially Vader confronting Obi-Wan, that whole, like, you made me, you did this to me. And Obi-Wan finally having to, like, accept that, yeah, I'm partially at fault here, but also being able to finally forgive himself, to be like, but you did most of this yourself, Anakin. Like, I'm sorry for what I did, but most of this is on you, buddy. Like, there's emotion there. It matters. And you don't need a big budget. You don't need special effects for that. That's dialogue. And that's what's lacking. And, like in The Mandalorian, when Luke shows up in the end of season 2, that had weight to it. That was here's what we were essentially promised by the old EU, the end of Return of the Jedi, and everything else. Here it is. Here's the payoff. Not that cowering old man of a failure in The Last Jedi that he was reduced to. This is what we wanted. And there's not even any dialogue. It's just Luke going through and just murdering the crap out of those dark troopers. Just showing that this is at his peak. This is his, peak confidence and power. He knows what he's about. He's here to get Grogu. Like, and anything that's between him and Grogu ain't walking out of here. So, like, and again, that's not even dialogue. That's just scenery. So, you can do things of consequence, of weight. You don't need a huge budget for that. So, they need to look at the original trilogy. They need to look at what worked. They need to look at the fight between Anakin and Obi-Wan in Revenge of the Sith. Look at these things. Figure out how, on a lower budget, without all the spectacle, you can still do the epic battle of good versus evil. This is what people come to Star Wars for. Yes, you can do about any kind of story set in the Star Wars universe. You can definitely do it. But you've got to, but there's got to be a reason why you're doing it in Star Wars and not just, for like a heist movie. Like, why aren't you just making Ocean's 11 again or something? Why does it need to be in Star Wars? What about Star Wars makes it possible for you to set it there? Makes it desirable for you to set it there? So, those are things that they've got to figure out if they're going to keep going forward. Because otherwise, they're just going to keep making it smaller and lesser. And it can be grand. It can be grandiose. I mean, The Lord of the Rings is epic in scope and magnitude and the feelings. And most of that, and I'm talking like the books, that's just the written word on the page. Most of the battles aren't even really thoroughly described. They get way more screen time than they get page time in the movies. But it's all about, but it pulls you in, you feel the stakes. And that's what good writing accomplishes. So, to me, that's the biggest failure that they have. I mean, I can point to all kinds of other things. I can point to just utterly wasting the heroes of the original trilogy. I can point to, like I mentioned in the last podcast, they have the most recognizable movie villain of all time in Darth Vader, and they just don't use him. Like, for that alone, everyone there should be fired who has any hand in that not happening. All of them should be fired. And I'm not the type of person that likes to see people lose their jobs or anything, but that's like borderline criminal incompetence. Like, they're cultural vandals who have no idea what they're doing. And I feel sorry for the few people there that genuinely kind of know, are on the right track. Like, I feel sorry for Ewan McGregor and Hayden Christensen. because the fans want them. They liked them from the prequel trilogy. They've come around in Hayden Christensen. I always thought he was pretty good as Anakin. Um, and so we want to see more of them. Give us more of them, but have it be well written. Like that's what we want. Like Mark Hamill's still alive. Give us Luke. Or if we're going to go for younger Luke, I think it's Sebastian Stan. Looks damn near exactly like him. Get him in there. Younger Luke, go for it. If we can convince Harrison Ford to come back as a Force ghost or something, I guess. I don't know. you know. And and Donald Glover as younger Lando. I like the guy that played the younger Han. Let's like that movie had several different ways you could follow up on it. Nothing. I think they're still making the movie with Lando, but maybe, who knows? That's what it comes down to. It's Star Wars is epic in scope. It's literally light versus dark, good versus evil on a galactic scale. The fate of the universe is, well, the galaxy's in balance kind of stuff. And that comes down to writing. You've got to have the visuals to back it up. I'm not saying it has no budget, but you can do it with a lot lower budget if you know what you're doing, if you really think it through. And so they almost need like someone like Roger Corman, who, for those of you who, I think, I know I've talked about him on here before a little bit, but Roger Corman is the kind of guy that, back in the day, you could have brought him, you could have been like, Roger, here's $1 million. Make me a movie. He will deliver a movie and probably give you some change. Now, is the movie going to look cheap? Maybe. But, it's going to be a movie. And it's going to have people that he has found who he thinks have talent, but they're at the beginning of their career, so this is like their exploratory phase. Like Jack Nicholson went to work for him as a writer real early on. Ron Howard, I think the first movie he directed was under Roger Corman. And, I was watching a thing with him. He unfortunately passed away earlier this year. The man was in his 90s and still had like 3 or 4 movies in production. He's been a part of over 700 movies. Like, this guy was a machine. And somewhere along the way, like, actually became like a respected voice in Hollywood. Like, people would call him from the studios like, hey, this guy said he worked for you. Like, does he know what he's doing? And they respected his opinion, because like James Cameron started his career working for him. Then goes on to make the Terminator, and the rest is history. I believe Bill Paxton started working for him. Galen Hurd, who's a major Hollywood producer, produces The Walking Dead and all kinds of other things. She started work under him. Like I said, Ron Howard, Jack Nicholson, all kinds of people started their career underneath him. And he could find talent and nurtured it. Like Ron Howard came to him and was like, it's like, Roger's like, I want to do this and this and this. Roger's like, whoa, Ron, we don't have the budget for that. But I see that you understand what you're doing. So, like, 2 or 3 movies from now, you're going to be working for a studio. You're going to have the budget. You're going to be able to do these things because you clearly have the eye for this. You've got the vision. You know what you're doing. And so, that's the kind of person he was. They need someone like that who can sit down and be like, okay, here's where we actually need the money. Here's where we can get by without the money, but not look super cheap. And so, like sometime, if you folks want to see an example of what I'm talking about, watch the movie Galaxy of Terror. Now, I'm going to warn you, there's a scene where a woman has forced interactions with a giant worm. And yes, that does mean what you probably think I mean by that. So I'm just fair warning. But if you see, watch the first 30, 40 minutes of the movie, I think you'll avoid that part if you want to. But just look at it. And remember, it's from the 80s. But see what a movie with no budget can look like if you know what you're doing. Now, I would want to look a little bit better than what that movie looks like, because there would be a budget. But there's no reason to have $180 million budget like The Acolyte. That's insane. I still am convinced there's money laundering going on there or something. But you look at how Roger Corman made that movie. He also made the Death Race 2000, which I'm sure a lot of you out there has probably heard of the movie Death Race, which is the prison, hey, let's put them in cars and have them chase around. That's a remake. The Death Race 2000 was a cross-country race where you get points for running people over, with David Carradine, Sylvester Stallone. I want to say the guy that plays John Kreese in the Karate Kid movies, and some other people, I'm sure. But yeah, it's a classic. Very violent. I'm not saying you should, and it looks a little cheaper, but it doesn't look bad. Now it's an older movie though, so it's going to look different. But my point is, like, you need someone with that kind of eye, with that kind of, okay, we've got this much money. We have to have these parts. We need them to look good. We can afford this level of talent, which that's something else. As much as I like seeing, actors I recognize, that was one thing about The Acolyte was the people in it were relatively unknowns, except for Carrie Ann Moss. Like Squid Game guy, I've only ever seen him in Squid Games. I've never seen the guy that played Yord in anything else. The one apprentice is Daphne Keane, I think is her name. She plays X-23 in Logan and Deadpool and Wolverine. But she's unrecognizable under the makeup. Then the green alien Jedi, I don't think I've ever seen her in anything else. I know she's in other things. I just don't think I've ever seen her. I don't think she's in anything hugely prominent. And so on. Like Smilo Ren. He's not really in anything else that I know of big. So you can get by casting unknowns. There's all kinds of unknown actors out there that are talented. They don't have to be A+ grade. Like, we could let's be realistic. And I'm not trying to put down Star Wars or anything, but like B+ grade is probably good enough, as long as we've got like an anchor in there, like in A New Hope. You've got like Mark Hamill, Harrison Ford, and Carrie Fisher were all relative newcomers. I think they'd been in a few other things by that point, but they were relative newcomers to movies, or absolute newcomers. And then you've got Alec Guinness and Peter Cushing, like legends, by that point in Hollywood, and mainly British movies, but still, in film. James Earl Jones had made a name for himself, even though he was just the voice guy for Vader, but he'd made a name for himself at that point. So, you've got the anchor that can keep things together, but then you have, the younger crowd, and that's what you got to do, So, anyway, so that's where I think things are just going wrong, just in general with their TV shows. They need to be longer. I think they need to have more episodes, and the episodes themselves need to be longer. Okay? Look at your direct competition. Your direct competition shows like House of the Dragon. Those shows are an hour long each, and there are more episodes in the season. So, and they're having to like, filming castles and things. I'm sure that has a huge budget, plus all the CGI for the dragons in these seasons, unlike Game of Thrones, where there weren't dragons for at least part of the show. So, that's your competition. And House of the Dragon, by all accounts, is a better show. I thought it was a better show than The Acolyte by far. So take your ideas like Obi-Wan, crush them down into movies like they should be. Now, I would release them theatrically. But maybe that's not the way you want to go. Maybe release them on Disney Plus as a movie. But also, I suppose one other thing to consider is it beneficial to not release them all at once like Netflix does? See, with Netflix, like Terminator Zero is 8 episodes, half-hour long each, but it's animated. I knocked that out in one day. Like, that was nothing. That was 4 hours. Boom, done. It helped that it was a good show. But then, like, Stranger Things, hour-long episodes, 10, 12 episodes a season. I've knocked out the seasons in a single day before. Like, season 2, Chad and I blitzed it out in one day. But you know, it's all there if you want to do it that way. And I think one of the reasons Disney Plus doesn't do that is because they don't have the constant flow of content that Netflix does, and they're afraid they're going to lose subscribers. So they string you along. But the problem is people know that you're doing that. And I think on balance you might actually lose subscribers because of that, especially for the price. So I don't know. That one's a tough one because I've noticed that some other ones, like I think Amazon, now has like set up where there are like essentially channels on there where they just have stuff just running like normal TV. And there's a market for that because that's the way Shudder does things, and people seem to like it. So there's definitely a market for it because things like Amazon and Netflix, while it's great that they have everything, it also is bad that they have everything because I get decision paralysis from cable TV when there's like 5 different things I might want to watch. Forget everything. You know, it's hard for me to make a choice, which I've noticed that Netflix now actually has a button to just like, I think they have a button just like randomly will pop something up, which is a good idea. So, you know, because they want that. They don't want to have to seriously put thought into what am I going to watch. They just want to watch something. And so, you know, maybe in that respect, having them release every week like a TV show, maybe that works better. I don't know. That one's a tough call. I feel like it doesn't, but I don't have the numbers, so it's hard to say. Uh, so yeah, I mean that would be something else to consider. But overall, the big thing is just it's the writing. You know, that's what's plagued Disney Star Wars from the beginning. And you know, you got this paradox of they have made some things that are good, like Rogue One's great, Andor's great. And what do those two things have in common? A bunch of nobodies that we don't know anything about, set during the Galactic Civil War, so we can put in the characters we do know some things about, at least the villains. And we're free to kill them if we want to. You know, like, maybe, and I hate to say this, but maybe we just need to zoom in on the Galactic Civil War and probably the Clone Wars and just dive in and expand. You know, give us the shows, give us live action Clone Wars movies. I've argued for that since since Attack of the Clones came out. You know, don't feel like you're bound by the trilogy concept, but you know, give us, you know, adapt the novel Shatterpoint, if it's all can still fit in the current canon, and you know, because it's an excellent novel. It's basically Vietnam in space, and it stars Mace Windu. So it's the trifecta. You know, we get a popular Jedi from the Clone Wars. The people that want representation get a black lead that the fan base already likes, and we get as gritty as Star Wars can be, war movie set during the Clone Wars that also sets up some things in a different novel later on for the old EU. You have that idea. You can take the Outbound Flight book. You can adapt that. That's mostly characters that you're never going to see again. So, you know, the only people that you're going to see that you know are, and that's if you perfectly adapt it, that's going to be Anakin, Obi-Wan, and Palpatine, and they're only very briefly in the book. And then the rest of the characters take off to the unknown regions, and the only other character you're going to meet that you know is Thrawn. So, and then the only other character that might matter is Jeru Sabaoth, and I'm probably mispronouncing his name. And that's only if you try to adapt the Thrawn trilogy later on, because his clone is there. You know, do things like that, and you know, just flesh out the two eras that you know are popular. You know, keep going back to that well, and then slowly work your way forward and figure out your way around the sequel trilogy if you're not going to just take it out of if you're not just going to take it out of canon, which I don't expect they will, but I have some ideas on how to get around it, but that's a whole other video. So It's probably where I'm going to go ahead and cut this one off. Just overall, like I said, I think the real key is its writing is just bad. It's just not. They don't understand what they're trying to do. They can't decide if they're trying to make a movie or a limited series or a TV show. These things all have different kinds of writing, and they just don't know where they're going with things. So there's no plan. There's no, should this be a show or should this just be a movie kind of thing. And that's the core problem with what they're doing on Disney Plus. The movies, it's writing, pure and simple. But the shows, they need to figure out what they're trying to accomplish, and then figure out what the best method to do that is, and then good writing, and hopefully get someone, like I said, like a Roger Corman type, who knows how to cut the budget so that you're not just throwing mountains of money at things. Yeah, so that's my spiel on where things are going wrong with the Star Wars TV shows. The animated shows are a different animal, different budgetary concerns, different show lengths, different season lengths. So I didn't really address those there. Plus, like I said, I haven't really watched all the way through like the Clone Wars and Rebels, and I really should. But that's a video for another day. So, as I keep saying, I really should be mentioning this stuff as I'm going along. So, like, share, subscribe, all that fun stuff. Let me know down in the comments if you've seen the shows. Like, where do you think I'm on the right track here? Like, am I out to lunch? Like, what are your thoughts on that? Does Disney have any clue what they're doing? Yeah, just let me know down in the comments. Like I said, share, subscribe. We always enjoy all that stuff. Commenting and liking is probably the best way comment and sharing is probably the best way to help spread the channel. And we appreciate all that. So, otherwise, just remember, the Force will be with you always.